record, you have to document everything that you do. We're really going to be serious about setting a framework for this work. So this first one is one that I am going to record myself. Okay, so just FYI on that. You all won't be in it, so no worries. Thank you all for being here. We are going to just connect together through breathing really quickly so we can get going. We always are doing our land acknowledgements here, and then as well as around the Seattle colleges, and just in general, all of the colleges that I know now are adopting land acknowledgements, but the importance of why we do land acknowledgements is more important to me. So what that looks like for here within North Seattle College, which you all can go back and share with any of your colleagues or friends, is that we're working with some leaders in our Duwamish tribal community to really develop what a land acknowledgement looks like here in North Seattle College. And doing that, we need to understand why we do the work that we do and understand why we even do land acknowledgements, which I must say I want to model out doing a land acknowledgement, but in doing so, I cannot be true to the work that I do, although I am very, very humbly excited that we're doing this work with the Duwamish tribe and nation to understand the land that we stand on. I must tell you that I wrestle with bringing my own ancestry into this work too as well. So I want to acknowledge everyone and acknowledge everyone's ancestry and what that looks like to you, your ancestors, who you want to bring into this work, because if we forget where we come from, then it's very, very easily, as we know in this today's society, as long as we don't talk about our history, then others will write it for us, and then we can erase others' histories and voices. So as we do this work, just be mindful of that. So let's come together really quickly. We're just going to do a breathing exercise, and I'm going to explain why we come together. Just, I think it's very, very important. A lot of people are doing a lot of different things as they do this work. So however you find yourself being comfortable, just be comfortable. If you don't have to sit, you can stand, whatever that looks like for you. And we're going to do that. So as we breathe together, I'm going to ask us to take one breath in and one breath out, and we're going to do it together on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. As within, so without. Do one more. As within, so without. And then our last one. As within, so without. Thich Nhat Hanh says this is the reason why we do breathing. Please read that to yourself. So what I appreciate about Thich Nhat Hanh and really bringing in what breathing does for us, and why it's important. I don't know if people just do breathing exercises just to do them, but I do breathing exercises based off of a mindfulness practice, off of Thich Nhat Hanh, and then off of Len Wang. That's why I do mindfulness practices. Come on in. And I do believe this quote to be true about breathing. Can someone reflect for me what this quote meant for you? Yes, please.
Sorry. I'm a hula practitioner, in case you didn't know. And ha means the breath of life. And so we can't ignore that. Even in the exchange of a greeting, aloha is talking about the breath of life. So it's very important to that culture. So I connected with that in what you were saying.
Breathing is the only act that we can either do voluntarily or involuntarily. We don't choose to grow our nails or grow our hair. That happens involuntarily. We can't involuntarily brush our teeth. Breathing is the only thing we do naturally or can control. And as your refrain indicates, it comes from the inside out, both physiologically and also symbolically.
I have one more person share, then we'll move on.
I just feel as though we do a lot so that we don't have the time to sit and think or whatever. So that's just a time to kind of, that's what I read there, is like to think about ourselves, right? Think about just our lives.
So in doing this and bringing together too as well, and we'll talk about what it looks like to create a beloved community. And I do apologize sitting down here. We were in, as you all know, in CC61 where I was able to stand and actually have a clicker. We moved there.
I got you on that.
Thank you.
If you want, I got a copy. I'm traveling.
Thank you, Doc.
Yeah,
My way, please. So yes, I appreciate it. So we'll, so the outline of today is what we are going to do, is really work on what it means to come together and develop an understanding in the groundwork. And what I appreciate, once again, I said it in the beginning of our conversations, as many as you know, that we've come together in multiple ways here in this work last year and did great, phenomenal work as a learning community. But this year we're focusing on grounding our language together, grounding our foundation together, and what that looks like. So this is going to be very important work for us. Our outcomes that I want us to look at and develop together for today's workshop training is really going to be about how we come together and develop this understanding to really do the work that we're going to do in our subgroups or as a whole group. Here are some key words. I sent these things out already to you all. So understanding, I'm going to jump right into social identities and what this looks like for us. Know that throughout today's time it's going to be very, very interactive. I'm going to ask that we come together in ways that have not been probably normal to you all. So it's going to be a very vulnerable situation. And I'm asking that we do this, and we're going to build a trust circle here in a minute too as well, so we can understand what it takes for us to do this work together. Okay, so when I think about social identities, and I love to talk about this work, and for those who have been around me to understand this work for me, what you'll know, in this work, everybody comes to it in a different angle and take it a different way. My philosophy, I really lean towards on being able to be yourself in this work. So when I think about social identities, I really think about how our social identities are formed from our childhood. Understanding that a lot of my theoretical foundations are very much Eurocentric right here in the U.S. That's where I was raised, taught, and that is where my education is from. So when you talk about cultural competency, we'll talk about that, but I do want to say that if you're going to be really culturally competent, then you will bring in other theoretical foundations and frameworks from other cultures. But I haven't seen anyone do that just quite yet, and I would love to see that happen if we're going to move the needle. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. So once again, in groups and out groups, can someone who may know about this work, I'll just say this, give you an example of what an in-group and what an out-group is. In this work, one thing that I love about the in-group work, as you can read what an in-group is I love my in-group. Let me tell you why I love my in-group. I love my in-group because it helped shape who I am today. I love my in-group because it helped me to understand that I can be DeAndre, Rajan, Fisher at all times, anytime. That's what my in-group does for me. But let me tell you why I don't like my in-group. Sometimes what in-groups have done, and I'll give you an example for me, compared to an out-group. My in-group also taught me to do this. As a self-identified African-American male, I was taught to do this from my birth. Whenever you see a police officer, you go the different direction, you act right, you stand up right, and you almost are afraid for your life. And that may not be what your in-group taught you about police officers, but that is what my in-group taught me about what police officers mean and do for an African-American male. The problem is, now what happens in our in-groups, for that example, I forgot I have this. The problem is what messages are being sent in our in-groups. So just as I led with what was great about my in-group and how it made me feel so excited and how I felt like I can be myself when I'm with my in-group, some of my in-groups are my fraternity brothers. Some of my in-groups that I identify are just my family members. Some of my in-groups that I identify are people who facilitate and do EDI work. Those are some of my in-groups. But once again, one of my examples of what I was taught as a young boy growing up in my in-group is to be scared of the police. So I want to be mindful that although I love what we learn from our in-groups and how we're taught and how we're brought up in our families, that if we don't check some of those in-group things and check some of those things that we're taught in our in-groups, those then can turn into some biases that we hold towards other in-groups, that we hold towards others who are not in our in-groups, and what that looks like. Here are some examples of some intercommunications that you'll find in your in-groups. Have anybody heard of what is the first one? A young boy throwing a ball and it goes directly, I won't use yours. It goes right here. And the message that we send to that young man and that young boy, they self-identify at that time, is that you throw like a girl. Can someone else tell me maybe some messagings that you had in your in-group, that you heard in your in-group, that you can relate to? I'll give you all examples, but for me, I'll tell you one of my facilitations. I am a call and response. So if you think that I'm just going to do the banking method and just deposit, I tell you that's not going to happen. So I'm going to need some feedback. So tell me, what do you all think? Any messages that you all know about or can relate to? Does any of these ring home? Okay, let's see you smiling. Anybody? An example? Please.
As an Asian child in an all-white school, they always thought that I would be the smart one in class, in every single class. So there was that in my in.
Any others?
My partner is Chinese, Japanese, from Hawaii, has many times been told she speaks English well, even though she's American.
Mine is more a gender issue, I think. I'm poor father, but I'll put him anyway. Must you be so goddamn cheerful? In other words, the message being, you are not restful for me to be around. Him being both the father and the male, me being the daughter and the female, a message that my primary duty in life is to be restful to be around.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. And I talked about some of the biases that we create in our in-groups. There is a definition of implicit bias. Keep going. One thing that I like about doing this work, and during our activity, you'll understand the importance of the model that I really appreciate is understanding. Has anybody seen that phenomenal, oh my gosh, it's a great, great movie. I absolutely love it. It's a love story. That phenomenal movie called Titanic. Come on in, baby. Come on in, baby. No, forget it. Come on, we're fine. We're a community. We know things happen, traffic, kids, family. Just things happen. No worries. So with that being said, what I like about the movie Titanic is that it's a great, great story. And until I got into this work that we now call, used to be multiculturalism and then affirmative action, and now we're so cute now, we do equity, diversity, and inclusion. Same stuff. But before I got really embedded in this work, and then I really watched Titanic, I was like, oh my gosh. This is racist, this is classist, this is everything that you can imagine, how they separate on the boat and how who's falling in love with who, and how the great love story couldn't really happen because one social class is here and the other social class is here. But I'll digress from that one now. So what I do and why I bring up the movie Titanic for those who've seen it, and I just say that for those who have not, I gave you just kind of my quick notes of Titanic, is that, so imagine yourself being the captain of that boat, And on that boat, you see a piece of ice in the water, of course, and when you think of that piece of ice in the water, you think absolutely, my boat, one of the biggest boats at that time in the United States, so we're going to just simply go around it. And if we barely just nick that piece of ice, that's fine, this boat can handle it. There's no need to even care or think about it. But the problem is the captain didn't realize what was beneath the water. What the captain saw was, I can go around this piece of ice. And I tie that into what we have on the board as the model that I believe is very, very important to this work, and that is when you decide that you want to go beneath the water. And when you go beneath the water, you'll understand that's where you truly find someone's values, what people really believe, what people really understand, and what they think about the work that they do in this day. I don't want to play the video. I thought that was just the model. I don't want to play the video. I think the video is amazing, and we'll send the link out to you to better help you understand what is the iceberg theory model. But what I'm trying to get you all to see when we will work out today in our first exercise is you'll see that we are now going to go deep. So what that means is the normal conversations that we have to get to know each other. Hi, how are you? Oh, okay, this is what you do. This is who you are. Based off of what I can see, I believe this is who you are. But now it is time, if we're going to really do this work and do it as a community, because that's what we've come together to do, then that means we need to really understand, who am I working with? Who am I doing this work with? Why is that important? Because there will be times in this work, as you all know, and this has not been anything new to North. You all have been doing this work since the start of North, but it makes it a lot more easier when you actually know the person you're doing the work with. Why does it make it a lot more easier? Because when I decide to say something and move in a certain way, because you know me outside of what you think about me, you'll understand why DeAndre does the things that DeAndre does, because I actually know his background is this. He was brought up this way. So if we understand that about people first, and not just, because we talk about policies that we need to see change, we understand there's policies out there. We always talk about who makes those policies and why those policies are the way they are and who wrote those policies. If we understand the framework that they use to write the policies, then we can understand why the policies are written. I'll give you an example of a policy that I'm talking about. So when you talk about how students are admitted into colleges, some of these policies have not ever been changed since the colleges have started. So if you can imagine what it takes, the requirements to get into college, the test that has to be taken before, the scores that you have to make before you're even accepted into a college or accepted into a certain class, that matters. But I wonder who was at the table when they decided to make those. Did they think about what it took for that African-American male under the water? Do they know what's really happening to that African-American male at home, but we're going to base what it takes to get into a college off of this one criteria or multiple criteria? But that is what I mean by us going and doing the work and really trying to say that we're not just going to surface level do the work, but do it beneath the water. So examples of things that you are here in this state is I believe that all people are equal. Yeah, I do believe in some instance that all people are equal. But what changes my perspective of all people being equal here in today's society is that what is that measurement of what's equal? What's equality for us in today's society? And the challenge for us is equality shows up differently in every culture. It shows up differently in every culture. It shows up differently in every aspect of the work that we do. Is because if you set a baseline of what equality looks like, it may not show up in the right area or the right place that you're in right now. I'll give you an example. For me, equality looks very, very different. For me, as an African-American male, what it would look like if I'm standing next to another male. What I need to make myself feel like I am at equal to another male who's not self-identified as African-American male would be very different than what I see the need of if there is a self-identified woman next to me. It's going to take a little more work to get to where we need to be. And the fact of the matter is, if we're going to measure what it's going to take, then we're going to have the real conversations to ask that person, what is it going to take, and not just assume that if I do this, if I do that, then this is what it's going to take. So we all know, luckily I have a group and I don't have to explain why equity matters, because this beloved group already knows why equity matters, and I can go in and tell you if we do this work, we know that it is proven to work. And that is the most difficult conversation to have with people when you need to have, first off, why it even matters. And I'm so grateful that we're not even in a space, I would assume, I hope, that we're not in a space in this learning community to talk about why it matters. Okay, so I'll go from there. But I do have a video that I want to play really quickly. Yep.
Last night at the dinner table, you weren't talking about white supremacy and whiteness as a cultural norm. And I figured this morning as you were preparing to come here, the topics power, privilege, and oppression weren't on your mind. Now, I'm saying these things jokingly, but the reality is our society has socialized us to not raise critical questions about these topics. And in reality, they exacerbate the racial and socioeconomic inequities that we have in society that then perpetuate themselves in our educational system. Schools never have, nor do they currently, prepare adults and young people to learn how to respect each other across cultural differences. Now, I've spent a lot of times in school as a student, a K-12 teacher, a teacher educator, and a researcher. And I've come to realize that racism, along with other forms of oppression, are still a major impediment to the academic underperformance of many students of color and poor students in our country. One of the things that I think prevents us from closing what are actually access and opportunity gaps is our inability to name issues of power as fundamental to the racial and cultural divide in this country. When we begin to examine power as part of the equation, we have a better understanding of how racism, oppression, and issues of cultural bias work to undermine the academic performance of students of color and low-income students. Now, all of this sounds pretty heavy and depressing, and nobody's laughing at what I'm saying. But the reality is, we have to examine these issues if we're going to close what we call achievement gaps in education. I want to share a story with you. I grew up in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, and I went to what were considered racially desegregated schools. I had a first grade teacher who didn't recognize my academic potential. In fact, I talked with a real slow Southern drawl because I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I got bored with the homework and the schoolwork a lot of times. I would act out. And this teacher sent me to the principal's office several times that year. And in fact, she told my parents that I should be tested for special education. Well, my mama, being the mama she was, said, "You ain't tested my child for special education. In fact, if you want to test her for gifted and talented." So I took the test, and as a first grader, I scored on a fourth grade level. And it turns out that I skipped second grade and went from first to third. Now, why am I telling you this story? Why is it even important? Because I believe so many youth like myself have had these kinds of experiences. That teacher did not know what to do with my energy or my intellect. She had labeled me as a child in need of academic remediation when in fact I needed academic challenge. Now, I don't blame her solely for her behaviors. In fact, I think her teacher education program and her professional development as an in-service educator had not prepared her for these new experiences in the 70s of teaching Black youth. And in fact, her low level of critical awareness about issues of race, culture, and power in teaching and learning impeded her from providing me the resources I actually need. I work with school leaders and educators around the nation all the time, and I hear them say, we want to address issues of racial and socioeconomic differences in our classrooms, but there's no time, right? Or there are no safe spaces to do that. I'm afraid it'll be tied to my evaluation if my principal hears me talking about my biases and my stereotypes. What I've tried to do in my work with educators is engage them in a process of critical self-reflection, because I believe this gap in consciousness about these issues is one of the equity imperatives of our time. And it's through helping educators think through these difficult topics that we'll be able to better meet the needs of our most struggling students in society. In order to do this, though, we've got to move away from those diversity workshops that happen 1 or 2 times a year for teachers and school leaders. This has to be a process of embedded, continual critical self-reflection throughout the professional work of educators, and really all of us. In this work that I do with educators, I ask them to consider 3 questions. The first one is, how does my own social location, my race, my class, my gender, my religion shape my mindset about teaching and learning, the students that I'm serving, and the practices that I act out? And secondly, what is it more that I need to know about what I don't know around those things related to culture, power, and difference? Where can I learn that material? And thirdly, this process helps educators to then continually be thinking about, how can I be a more critically conscious leader and instructor? And in our country, where we have such gross racial inequities in education, along with socioeconomic inequities, I think teachers and school leaders have to be thinking about, how can I be a more critically race-conscious educator? Now, there are a lot of things that I could say about critical race consciousness, but I'm going to tell you about 3 big ideas that I help educators engage in as they do this work. The first is an understanding that there is a system and a culture of power that oppresses and suppresses other cultures in order to maintain itself. That's pretty depressing, I'm sorry I had to tell you. But we all operate in that system. And that system is rooted in racial and social class hierarchy, right? It puts upper and middle income whites, and if we add gender, white men, at polar opposites with people of color and poor people in our country. And we see this play out in our educational system. This system, also known as white supremacy, has at its core this understanding that particularly African Americans are genetically inferior and not fully human. We have this racial stain on our history through racial enslavement of that particular group. Yet and still, we expect students of color and many poor kids who come to our school doors already behind the 8 ball to amass the same level of successes as those who are inherently privileged by the system. Now, why is this important for educators to understand? Because they have to be able to situate their own selves as one who is privileged in the system and how they're either using their privileges to help children or to harm them. The second big idea that I try to get educators to understand so that they're more equitable in their work is that we cannot be colorblind nor color mute. There used to be a time in this country when teachers could say, I treat all my kids the same. I don't see color. They're just all kids. But we cannot do that anymore. Our public school population is over 40% students of color, yet our teaching force is over 80% white. There is an inherent cultural mismatch, yet and still we believe that sameness produces equitable outcomes. For so long, we have been throwing the same amount of resources into schools and school programs and expecting that that will provide equal access to opportunities. And it just doesn't work that way. Educators have to be committed to saying, I understand and recognize that I work in a system that is inherently unequal. And I'm going to do whatever I need to, come hell or high water, to bring those kids who come already under-resourced up to the level of those, and even beyond, those who come to school with the resources already at hand. The third thing that I try to get educators to understand is that meritocracy is a myth. This idea that if we all just work hard and put forth effort, we'll get our piece of the American dream is a farce. That formula works for those who come to school already knowing those social and cultural codes of how to do school. But that formula is devoid of considering issues of racism, classism, and other forms of oppression as potential barriers for kids living in poverty and many kids of color. So this idea that if you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you should be able to do what other people have done just doesn't work. And in fact, the media sensationalizes rags to riches stories to keep us believing that. Let's play that example out. Some kids come to school with boots.
I'm going to stop it there. I think she hit on a couple of good points. Can anyone unpack that, what they were able to take away from her points? Anything rests with you? Anything stood out?